Hello and welcome one more time. My name is Alex Centeno, and in this exciting tutorial we're going to be taking a look at how to take footage from the Gh5 Panasonic Vlog to HDR. So obviously HDR grading is a topic on itself. It's a very complex topic that includes many things. But this tutorial is an introduction of how to take Panasonic's Vlog from the Gh5 into the world of direct HDR. In a previous video, I think we did a conversion of a HLG, and the Gh5 by itself records in HLG. So technically you could just set up the camera to record in HLG and you would be doing HDR. But in this case, what we're going to be doing is taking Vlog, bringing it into Davinci Resolve, and then going to ST2084 to HDR in H.265. So I hope you're excited. Let's take a look. Alright, let's see here. I am in Davinci Resolve, and I have a clip here, and this is what we're going to be working with. So I just have it here in my media library. I'm going to go to the edit tab, and from here I'm going to drag my clip into my timeline. Let's take a look at my project settings. So I'm going to go to the gears icon here at the bottom. And first, let's take a look at master settings. Timeline resolution, we're going to be working with a 4K Ultra HD clip in 24 frames per second. The video monitoring that I'm using is an Atomos Ninja Inferno with 1500 nits. And you probably want to have an HDR monitor, ideally, you know, something that is a calibrated HDR monitor. That's ideal. But if you don't, like I don't, the Atomos Ninja Inferno would do, and other similar monitors would do. If you have a TV that replicates the P3-DCI color space, and it has HDR modes like HDR10, HDR10 Plus, Dolby Vision. You can also follow along with that as well. If you don't have an HDR monitor and you're just monitoring via SDR, then at the very least you'll get the sense. I'll try to make it as simple as possible to follow along with the scopes, but know that it's going to be a lot more difficult, and you're going to end up exporting a clip that you don't know how it's going to fully look until you actually see it in an HDR display. So we're going to be using data levels of full 10-bit and enable HDR metadata over HDMI. So that's kind of the important thing for the video monitoring. In terms of color management, we're having the color science of color managed, and we're going to use the Resolve color management preset of wide gamut for the actual timeline. And then from there, we're going to output color space of P3-DCI and ST2084 1000 nits. You can also uncheck this and just select the P3-DCI ST2084 1000 nits. I'm going to be checking display HDR and viewers, and HDR mastering is for 1500 nits because that's what the Atomos Ninja Inferno can display. You can change this to whatever your monitor can bring to. Finally, HDR10 Plus, we're going to enable that here as well. Anything else? I think that's pretty much it. Let's take a look. I'm going to save this and I'm gonna go to my options to show you, to my preferences, and show you what I have here in video and audio I/O. So for playback use, I have the DeckLink Mini Monitor 4K, and that's what's connected directly to my computer. And my Atomos Ninja is connected to the DeckLink. I am not very familiar with ways of going around the necessity of having a DeckLink mini monitor to actually go out with HDR with the full data levels. So I don't know if you can, but in order to do HDR output, you probably will need 4K monitor or the SDI monitor or other Davinci Resolve monitors. So check out the specs for that. Like I said, in this case, I have the DeckLink Mini Monitor 4K. Awesome. So that's what is needed. I have my clip in the timeline. I'm gonna click over it once, and I'm gonna right click. I'm gonna take a look at clip attributes. It's a clip of 60 frames per second. I'm gonna change it to 24. I'm gonna change the data levels to full and hit OK. And finally, this clip is in Vlog, so I'm gonna go to the input color space to change it from Rec 709 to actually Panasonic Vignette Vlog. So when I do that, immediately the colors start showing up. The proper curve is being displayed, and it already looks fantastic. So let's take a look at the actual process of converting Vlog to an HDR H.265 file. So here I'm going to create a few nodes. So I'm going to do 3 parallel nodes. The first one I'm going to call exposure. The second one I'm going to call contrast. The third one I'm going to call saturation. And let's start working with this. First of all, I'm going to correct for exposure. So I'm going to change the master offset a little bit to make it brighter. As I'm doing this, I'm taking a look at the HDR monitor, but also I want you to take a look at the scopes here, and also at the actual scopes that I'm using. So let's go here to Rgb Colorized, and the reference levels here are from 42 to the high of 1000, and it's showing those levels here. You can see that the highlighting of the 1000 and the 42 there. That's not too important, but when you go to the waveform scale style, this is where it's important, because you may have it to 10-bit by default, and you may have it to something else. So I'm going to change it to HDR and data levels. And let's make sure that everything else looks good. Quality, you can change it. I'm going to have it to medium, and I'm going to be working with either the waveform or with the parade. For now, I'm just going to use the parade. Excellent. So what I'm doing is changing the master offset first of all to make it a little bit brighter. And then I'm working with my primaries to bring my gain a little bit hotter, or increasing the gain. And what I'm doing is I'm taking a look at my scopes to see where the clipping is occurring. Also, I'm working with my lift here. And as I am taking a look at the scopes, I'm also taking a look at the monitor to see how it looks. Again, this is what I was repeating before. If you don't have an HDR monitor, you can still do it, but you won't know exactly how it looks in the final rendering until you take it to an HDR monitor, because there's simply no way to see like what you can see in my screen right now, in my SDR screen, has nothing to do with the actual way that the HDR monitor displays this. It's very different. So I'm going to show you something. So here in the scopes, I am kind of, you can see that almost all of them are getting close to the 1 number here, to the number 1. This one, the blue, is a little bit going towards the 0, but in general, you can see that they're going towards the 1. And in HDR, so let me go back a little bit. In SDR, when you are grading in SDR, you're kind of getting close to 0 to crush your blacks and expand as much as possible the image. But in HDR, if you do that, your image is going to end up with blacks that are very dark. And so all the range from shadows, darks, and blacks are going to end up like really, really dark. So as you're grading, I've noticed that you want to keep your levels closer to this range, to the range of 1 instead of to the range of 0. All right. Next, we're going to be correcting our gamma a little bit. In HDR, the normal range, well, or the range that we have set for this project is 1000 nits. What that means is that a regular SDR monitor is capable of around 100 nits, some, of course, a little bit more. But around 100 nits is what would normally be displayed by an SDR monitor. And so everything above is actually a highlight in the HDR monitor. So what we're doing is trying to get the majority of our image that is luminosity, that is information. You want it to get around the 100 or less. And then the highlight information, the thing that is going to pop in the image, you're going to try to get it above 100 and from 100 to 1000 in this case. So that's what I'm trying to do. So I am playing with my lift gamma gain so that I can do exactly that. I can move the detail of my image so that it is at around 100 nits, and then I am improving the level of, in this case, of my gains, so that I display them without clipping at 1000 nits. If you're interested in the specifics of how to measure for the maximum range of the HDR signal, there is a great tutorial by Mystery Box, and you can find it online. I do highly recommend reading it. I don't think that they have a video about it, so it's a written form, but their footage looks absolutely remarkable. And they speak about data levels and how to manage the averages and how to protect your monitor from overexposing and whatnot. So I highly recommend that. This video is like an introduction, so it's not about going into details of those things. All right, so this is looking okay. Let me play a little bit more with the gamma as I'm looking, because I feel like it could be a little bit darker there. All right, that's looking pretty good. Let's do contrast. So now I'm increasing the contrast of the image as a whole. And I'm going to move it a little brighter. All right, that's looking great. And then I'm going to move to saturation. I'm going to add a little bit of color boost first. And I'm going to add saturation. I'm not going to add a lot of saturation, and it's not that I don't want this image to really be saturated. As you can see, it's a sunset, so we want those oranges to be really, really saturated and rich. We want them vibrant, but we're going to do that in the next step, so that's why I'm not pushing that too much. So we're done with the, I guess, the regular balancing of our image. We do the same in SDR. So we're going to create another serial node, and in this node we're going to name it HDR. All right, and we have a new tool in Davinci Resolve 17 called Hdr Curves, or HDR trackballs, and we're going to be working with those. We have the ranges here at the top, so you can select 3 at a time. So if I select here at the bottom, then we're going to have the black, dark, and shadow first. And if I select the top one, we're going to change to specular, highlight, and light. And we can select the combination that we want. So I could bypass, for example, the black altogether and have the dark shadow light as opposed to working with the bottom one, or so on and so forth. I like to work with black, dark, and shadow first, and then move to specular, highlight, light, and just do these 2 passes between this 3 and this 3. But of course you can do that however you want. And then if you click here in the opening of the window, it actually shows you those zones. So the repercussions of moving the shadows, for example, are going to be reflected in your histogram here. So if I was to, for example, change the exposure of my black, then you can see how it changes here. So you can see that the curve, as I move it up or down, I'm doing this with my mouse over the exposure, you can see that it changes the composition of the curve, the blue curve here on the zones. All right. If I click on this icon, I can see that my image turns to a selection that represents that zone. So it shows me what's being selected by the values of the max range and the fall off. So let's say that I want to know here, for example, what values are selected by the light, what is being affected by this trackball. So I can just select here, and then it shows me the selection directly on the screen. Also, I can see the zone here, and I can see the fall off in the red gradient here. I can manipulate the zone, so the minimum range, by moving it either with the arrow here at the top, or I can change it directly with the minimum range here. And I can manipulate the fall off by changing the fall off to the right. So the more feathering I have, the more I'm moving it to the right. The least feathering that I want, the more I'm going to move it to the left. And that happens for each one of these ranges. All right, so depending on which one, you'll see how it actually operates. And I can create any zones that I want by creating new zones. These are just the defaults, and I can tell you those are plenty at the beginning. Like you don't need more than those zones because you already have plenty of control by the definition of those zones. Excellent. So let's start with the darker parts of our image. So what I'm going to do is select these 3 balls. My panel is going to then use the balls for each one of those 3 zones. So black, dark, and shadow when I have these 3 selected. So first I'm going to start with my black levels. And so I'm going to be using the exposure. And you can see that I am affecting almost nothing in my image. The way that you see that is because my curve, the actual histogram, is showing absolutely nothing to the left of this zone. So I can grab from my zone and move it to the right so that I am actually affecting something there. So now the movements are going to affect the curve at this level. So I'm going to bring that a little bit lower so that actually I am bringing those completely to darkness, like that. Next, I'm going to affect my darks. So if I select the dark, you can see the changes in the image. I'm darkening the darks as well. And finally, the shadows, I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, that's looking pretty good, like that. And now I'm going to move to the lighter parts of my image. So I'm going to click on the last one of this. And I'm going to start with the specular, so from the higher end. So from the specular, I want to bring it down just to see what it's affecting. So as I bring this down, I'm taking a look at my scopes to see what is being brought down. Now that I know what is being affected, the portion of the curve in the scope, in the parade, that is being affected, then I can actually bring it up a little bit, making sure that I'm not clipping there, and then keeping an eye on the monitor to actually bring it so that I have my speculars the way that I want them. All right, and now I'm gonna do my highlight. So same thing, this time instead of going down, I'm just gonna bring it up because I know that it needs to go up anyways. So I'm just bringing it up in the image. And that looks pretty good there. And then finally, I'm going to do the same with my light. The light is really, in my opinion, what has a lot of the detail, and that's what you want to increase most of the time. So I'm rotating to the right in order to bring up the exposure in the light. If I was going by the SDR monitor right now, I would probably say this is too much. But that's exactly the problem with doing it by SDR, because when you see it in the HDR monitor, you see that it's actually, it has plenty of room there. All right, so now it's looking good. And now what I can do is control the saturation of each one of these zones. So instead of just controlling the exposure, which is in itself plenty of control, then I can also change the saturation. So I'm going to go to the saturation here and increase this number for the lights. And that orange is just looking really, really nice. All right. Great. Now that is the control of the exposure of each one of the zones and the saturation. And I could have separated those into nodes, but we're not going to do that right now. Let's go ahead and create another node, and let's call this one grade. And in here is where we could actually do the grade, and we can do it from the HDR. So I'm just going to introduce a little bit of teal to the shadows. So I'm going to be pulling towards the bottom. And with HDR, one of the beautiful things is that lower level lights of blue, for example, water, or the sky when it's a little bit darker, HDR actually has the potential for providing saturation for those levels, which doesn't happen in SDR. And it's like so beautiful to see that saturation in a deep blue, because that's how the human eye actually operates. And so it's just, it's really, really nice to see that. All right, that's looking pretty good. And then I'm going to do the opposite. In the light, I am going to bring a little bit more movement towards the oranges, which this image doesn't need a whole lot, but it's going to create that contrasting color. So I did a little bit much there, and I'm going to reduce it little by little. All right, that's looking pretty good. Those kind of things are very difficult to do. First of all, with just the trackballs with the mouse, and second, without the monitor. So that's why I recommend, if you're actually going into HDR and you are interested in exploring that world, I do recommend that you get an HDR monitor and a 4K mini display link, or a mini link display, or a mini plus mini display link, whatever it's called, the 4K Davinci Resolve mini display link. I recommend that you get it, because once you are grading while you're seeing what you're grading, it actually makes the biggest difference in the world. Instead of trying to wing it without that, you'll have very little control of what's happening and what it'll end up looking like in the final version. All right, let's take a look at a couple of things in my timeline. So this is going to complete our node tree. And in our timeline, we have two things. First of all, we have a little bit of grain. To do this, you just go to Open Effects, you grab a grain, and then you drop it into the node itself. I'm just using here a film preset. You can change to whichever. I'm using a custom one, but you can use whichever. Normally I do like a 35mm one and change like the details. The second one is a vignette, which very simply you just create a power window, circular power window, reverse it, and then lower the midtones to that. All right, so those are the finishing touches. So again, how do we transform the Vlog, Panasonic Gh5 Vlog to HDR? So the first part is bringing it into Davinci Resolve and selecting the appropriate color space. We're bringing it from V-Gamut Vlog to the timeline, which is Davinci's Y-Gamut, and then going finally to ST2084 with 1000 nits. That in itself looks pretty good, but then we just do the node tree to actually color correct. That's all we did there. And then finally we deliver. So how do we deliver? We give it a file name, we give it a location. If your clip has audio, then you can select audio and the file itself. We're gonna go to simple clip. And in terms of video, you wanna select a video that counts for 10 bits. So you can go to QuickTime, ProRes, Apple ProRes, if you're using this for something else. So if this is an intermediate step, then you can use Apple ProRes 422, HQ 444, whatever it may be, if this is just a step before going to the final output. If you're going finally to wherever you're delivering, then you can go to a more compressed codec like the H265. So H265 allows for 10-bit and even 12-bit 4K. And so in this case, we're going to go to that. Now there's a step that we haven't talked about. So let's go to that one now. So I'm going to go to color, and then I am finished with my grade. And then from here, I'm just going to go to color HDR10 plus, and then analyze the selected shot, which is the only shot we have here. This is going to take a while, and because it's a very short clip, then it's going to take no time whatsoever. But it's going to take a few seconds to analyze that, and it's going to make 3 assessments. And you can read the details in that post that I'm telling you about with Mystery Box. In any case, what's happening here is like the calculation of the maximum output for this particular scene in HDR10 without the plus. Then the whole timeline is going to just have a maximum level, lower level, and an average level, and then that brightness is going to be reflected across the entire video. In other words, there's no dynamic metadata. HDR10 plus replicates what Dolby Vision does, which is dynamic metadata per scene. In other words, it calculates for each one of your scenes what are those parameters, like what is the highest brightness that it's going to achieve, what is the lowest level, and what's the average. And then it creates this metadata. All right, so by going to color and then going to HDR10 plus and analyzing, then it's going to come up with that metadata for you. And then now you're going to have in your clip a little HDR that appears to the bottom right corner here. And if we actually go to HDR10 in our palette, you'll see that now the enable tone mapping preview has been checked. And I can uncheck it to just check how it looks again in my HDR monitor, or you can just enable the tone mapping to continue to see it how it would display in an SDR display. And that's pretty much it. So now we have like the HDR10 plus metadata. Now we can go to deliver with that information. So QuickTime H.265, embed the HDR10 metadata that we just created. Then we have the resolution, which we're gonna keep at the same, the timeline resolution. We're gonna keep the quality the same. The encoding profile, we're gonna change to main 10. And then we're going to keep the full data level. So if this is set to automatic, you wanna change it to full. And we're going to add to render queue. Once you set it to render, then all you have to do is click on render the video, and that will export an H.265 from your vlog in full HDR with the proper color profile attached to the video. So for example, if you were to upload it to YouTube, it would actually have the proper flags for HDR in ST2084. But also it would have the proper metadata for HDR10 plus. So if you have a video that has more than one scene in the timeline, then each one of those would actually have the maximum range of brightness based on that metadata. I hope that this has been helpful and a great introduction to the world of HDR. It's so beautiful. I mean, it's unbelievable. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below in the video. We really appreciate those. If you like this video, please give it a like, smash the notification bell, and if you really liked it, recommend it to someone you love. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.